to our Sunday Krishna book reading to Srila Prabhupada. Welcome everyone online. And before we begin, let's offer our respectful obeisances to Srila Prabhupada and to each other. Nama Om Vishnumadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nirvasesha Sunyavadi Paskacha Deshatarane, and to each other, Vanchakalpadrubhischa Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So for everyone online and for everyone here, let's turn to chapter 87, Prayers by the Personified Vedas. And because this is a very long chapter, we started last week and we ended to about 5 or 6 pages in, and we're beginning with the paragraph that says at the very top, and well, in different books it's different, so I don't want to tell you which page, but we're starting with undoubtedly the eternal living entity. So online you can note the subtitles at the captions at the bottom of the screen, so that will help you to follow along. Undoubted cannot be annihilated at any point, but the lower species of life exist in a miserable condition, whereas one who is engaged in the devotional service of the Supreme Lord is situated in the pleasurable or Anandamaya status of life. The different stages described above are all in relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Although in all circumstances there exists both the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entities, the difference is that the Supreme Personality of Godhead always exists in the Anandamaya stage, whereas the subordinate living entities, because of their minute position as fragmental portions of the Supreme Lord, are prone to fall to the other stages of life. Although in all the stages both the Supreme Lord and the living entities exist, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is always transcendental to our concept of life, whether we are in bondage or in liberation. The whole cosmic manifestation becomes possible by the grace of the Supreme Lord. It exists by the grace of the Supreme Lord, and when annihilated, it merges into the existence of the Supreme Lord. As such, the Supreme Lord is the supreme existence, the cause of all causes. Therefore, the conclusion is that without development of Krishna consciousness, one's life is simply a waste of time.
For those who are very materialistic and cannot understand the situation of the spiritual world, the abode of Krishna, great sages have recommended the yogic process whereby one gradually rises from meditation on the abdomen, which is called Muladhara, or the Manipuraka meditation. Muladharaka and Manipuraka are technical terms which refer to the intestines within the abdomen. Grossly, materialistic persons think that economic development is of foremost importance because they are under the impression that a living entity exists only by eating. Such grossly materialistic persons forget that although we may eat as much as we like, if the food is not digested, it produces the troubles of indigestion and acidity. Therefore, eating is not in itself the cause of the vital energy of life. For digestion of eatables, we have to take shelter of another superior energy, which is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita as Vaishvanara. Lord Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that he helps the digestion in the form of Vaishvanara. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is all-pervasive. Therefore, his presence in the stomach as Vaishvanara is not extraordinary.
Krishna is actually present everywhere. The Vaishnava therefore marks his body with the temple of Vishnu. He first marks the Tilak temple on the abdomen, then on the chest, then between the collarbone, then on the forehead, and gradually he marks the top of the head, the Brahma Randra. The 13 temples of the Tilak marked on the body of Vaishnava are known as follow. On the forehead is the temple of Lord Kesava. On the belly is the temple of Lord Narayana. On the chest is the temple of Lord Madhava. And on the throat between the two collarbones is the temple of Lord Govinda. On the right side of the waist is the temple of Lord Vishnu. On the right arm are the temple of Lord Madhusudan. And on the right side of the collarbone, the temple of Lord Trivikrama. Similarly, on the left side, the waist is the temple of the Lord Vamandev. On the left arm, the temple of Sridhar. On the left side of the collarbone, the temple of Harikesha. On the upper back, the temple called Padmabha. And on the lower back, the temple called Damodar. On the top of the head is the temple called Vasudev. This is the process of meditation on the Lord's situation in the different parts of the body. But for those who are not Vaishnava, great sages recommended meditation on the body concept of life. The meditation on the intestine, on the heart, of the throat, on the eyebrows, on the forehead, and then on the top of the head. Some of the sages in the disciple succession from the great saint Arun meditate on the heart because the supreme super soul stays within the heart along with the living entity. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, 15th chapter, where the Lord says, I am situated in everyone's heart.
As part and parcel of devotional service, please. As part of devotional service, Vaishnavas protect the body for the service of the Lord, but those who are gross materialists accept the body as the self. They worship the body by the yogic process of meditation on the different bodily parts, such as the Manipuraka, Dahara, and Hirdaya, gradually rising to the Brahma Randra on the top of the head. The first-class yogi who has attained perfection in the practice of the yoga system ultimately passes through the Brahma Randra to any one of the planets in either the material or the spiritual worlds. How a yogi can transfer himself to another planet is vividly described in the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam.
In this regard, Sukadev Goswami has recommended that the beginners worship the Virata Purusha, the gigantic universal form of the Lord. One who cannot believe that the Lord can be worshipped with equal success in the deity or arch form, or who cannot concentrate on this form, is advised to worship the universal form of the Lord. The lower part of the universe is considered the feet and the legs of the Lord's universal form. The middle part of the universe is considered the navel or abdomen of the Lord. The upper planetary systems, such as Gyanaloka and Maharaloka, are the heart of the Lord, and the topmost planetary system, Brahmaloka, is considered the top of the Lord's head. There are different processes recommended by great sages according to the position of the worshipper. But the ultimate aim of all meditational yogic processes is to go back home, back to Godhead. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita, anyone who reaches the highest planet, the abode of Krishna, or even the Vaikuntha planets, never has to come down again to this miserable material condition of life.
The Vedic recommendation, therefore, is that one make the lotus feet of Vishnu the target of all one's efforts. Tad Vishnu Paramam Param. The Vishnu planets, or Vishnu Loka, are situated above all the material planets. These Vaikuntha planets are known as Sanatan Dharma, and they are eternal. They are never annihilated, not even by the annihilation of this material world. The conclusion is that if a human being does not fulfill the mission of his life by worshipping the Supreme Lord and does not go back home, back to Godhead, it is to be understood that he is breathing just like a blacksmith's bellows, living just like a tree, eating just like a camel, and having sex just like the dogs and hogs. Thus, he has been frustrated in fulfilling the specific purpose of human life. The next prayer of the personified Vedas to the Lord concerns his entering into different species of life. It is stated in the Bhagavad Gita, 14th chapter, that in every species and form of life, the spiritual part and parcel of the Supreme Lord is present. The Lord himself claims in the Gita that he is the sea-given father of all forms and species, who therefore must all be considered sons of the Lord. The entrance of the Supreme Lord into everyone's heart as Paramatma sometimes bewilders the impersonalists into equating the living entities with the Supreme Lord. They think both the Supreme Lord and the individual soul enter into the various bodies. So where is the distinction?
Why should individual souls worship the Paramatma or Super Soul? According to them, the Super Soul and the individual soul are on the same level. They are one, without any difference between them. There is a difference, however, between the Super Soul and the individual soul, and this is explained in the Bhagavad Gita, 15th chapter, wherein the Lord says that although he is situated within the living entity in the same body, he is superior. He is dictating or giving intelligence to the individual soul from within. It is clearly stated in the Gita that the Lord gives intelligence to the individual soul, and that both memory and forgetfulness are due to the influence of the Super Soul. No one can act independently or of the sanction of the Super Soul. The individual soul acts according to his past karma, reminded by the Lord. The nature of the individual soul is forgetfulness, but the presence of the Lord within the heart reminds him of what he wanted to do in his past life. The intelligence of the individual soul is exhibited like fire in wood. Although fire is always fire, it is exhibited in a size proportionate to the size of the wood. Similarly, although the individual soul is qualitatively one with the Supreme Lord, he exhibits himself according to the limitations of his present body. But the Supreme Lord, or the Super Soul, is unlimited. He is said to be Eka Rasa. Eka means one, and Rasa means mellow. The transcendental position of the Supreme Lord is that of eternity, bliss, and full knowledge. His position of Eka Rasa does not change in the slight test when he becomes a witness and advisor to the individual soul in each individual body.
But the individual soul, from Lord Brahma down to the ant, exhibits his spiritual potency according to his present body. The demigods are in the same category with the individual souls in the bodies of human beings or in the bodies of lower animals. Intelligent persons, therefore, do not worship different demigods, who are simply infinitesimal representatives of Krishna manifest in conditioned bodies. The individual soul can exhibit his power only in proportion to the shape and constitution of the body. The Supreme Person Godhead, however, can exhibit his full potencies in any shape or form without any change. The Mayavadi philosopher's thesis that God and the individual soul are one and the same cannot be accepted because the individual soul has to develop his power according to the development of different types of bodies. The individual soul in the body of a baby cannot show the full power of a grown man, but the Supreme Person of Godhead, Krishna, even when lying on the lap of his mother as a baby, could exhibit his full power by killing Putana and other demons who attacked him. Thus, the spiritual potency of the Supreme Person Godhead is said to be ekarasa, or without change. The Supreme Person of Godhead, therefore, is the only worshipable object, and this is perfectly known to persons who are uncontaminated by the modes of material nature. In other words, only the liberated souls can worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Less intelligent Mayavadis take to the worship of the demigods, thinking that the demigods and the Supreme Personality of Godhead are on the same level.
The personified Vedas continued to offer their obeisances. Dear Lord, they prayed, after many, many births, those who have actually become wise take to the worship of your lotus feet in complete knowledge. This is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita, wherein the Lord says that after many, many births, a great soul or Mahatma surrenders unto the Lord, knowing well that Vasudeva, Krishna, is the cause of all causes. The Vedas continued, as already explained, since the mind, intelligence, and senses have been given to us by God, when these instruments are actually purified, there is no alternative but to engage them all in the devotional service of the Lord. A living entity's entrapment in different species of life is due to the misapplication of his mind, intelligence, and senses in material activities. Various kinds of bodies are awarded as the result of a living entity's actions, and they are created by the material nature according to the living entity's desire. Because a living entity desires and deserves a particular kind of body, it is given to him by the material nature under the order of the Supreme Lord.
In Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, it is explained that under the control of superior authority, a living entity is put within the semen of a male and injected into the womb of a particular female in order to develop a particular type of body. A living entity utilizes his senses, intelligence, mind, and so on in a specific way of his own choosing and thus develops a particular type of body within which he becomes engaged. In this way, the living entity becomes situated in different species of life, either in a demigod, human, or animal body, according to different situations and circumstances. It is explained in the Vedic literature that the living entities entrapped in different species of life are part and parcels of the Supreme Lord. The Mayavadi philosophers mistake the living entity for the Paramatma, who is actually sitting within the living entity as a friend. Because the Paramatma, the localized aspect of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the individual living entity are both within the body, a misunderstanding sometimes takes place that there is no difference between the two. But there is a definite difference between the individual soul and the super soul, and it is explained in the Varaha Purana as follows.
The Supreme Lord has two kinds of parts and parcel. The living entity is called Vibhu Mahamsa, and the Paramatma or the planetary expansion of the Supreme Lord is called Swamsa. The Swamsa planetary expansion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is powerful as the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself. There is not even the slightest difference between the potency of the Supreme Person and that of His planetary expansion as Paramatma. But the Vibhusam parts and parcel possess only a minute portion of the potency of the Lord. The Nanda Pancharatna states that the living entities who are marginal potency of the Supreme Lord are undoubtedly of the same qualities of the spiritual extent as the Lord Himself. But they are prone to be tainted with the material qualities, because the minute living entity is prone to be subjected to the influence of the material qualities. He is called Jiva, and sometimes the Supreme Personality of Godhead is also known as Shiva, the all-auspicious one. So the difference between Shiva and Jiva is the all-auspicious personality of Godhead is never affected by the material qualities, whereas the minute portion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are prone to be affected by the qualities of the material nature.
The super soul within the body of a particular living entity, being a plenary portion of the Lord, is worshipable by the individual living entity. Great sages have therefore concluded that the process of meditation is designed so that the individual living entity may concentrate his attention on the lotus feet of the supersoul form, Vishnu. That is real samadhi. The living entity cannot be liberated from material entanglement by his own effort. He must therefore take to the devotional service of the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord or the Supersoul within himself. Sridhar Swami, the great commentator on Srimad Bhagavatam, has composed a nice verse in this regard, the meaning of which is as follows. My dear Lord, I am eternally a part of you, but I have been entrapped by the material potencies which are also an emanation from you. As the cause of all causes, you have entered my body as the supersoul, and I have the prerogative of enjoying the supreme blissful life of knowledge along with you. Therefore, my dear Lord, please order me to render you loving service so that I can again be brought to my original position of transcendental bliss.
Great personalities understand that a living entity entangled in this material world cannot be freed by his own efforts. With firm faith and devotion, such great personalities engage themselves in rendering transcendental loving service to the Lord. That is the Vedic verdict of personified Vedas. The personified Vedas continued, Dear Lord, it is very difficult to achieve perfect knowledge of the absolute truth. Your Lordship is so kind to the fallen souls that you appear in different incarnations and execute different activities. You appear even as a historical personality of this material world, and your pastimes are very nicely described in the Vedic literatures. Such pastimes are as attractive as the ocean of transcendental bliss. People in the general have a natural inclination to read narrations in which ordinary jivas are glorified. But when they become attracted by the Vedic literatures which delineate your eternal pastimes, they actually dip into the ocean of transcendental bliss, as a fatigued man feels refreshed by dipping into a reservoir of water. So the conditioned soul, who is very much disgusted with the material activities, become refreshed and forgets all the fatigue of material activities. Simply by dipping into the transcendental ocean of your pastime, the eventually he merges into the ocean of transcendental bliss. The most intelligent devotees, therefore, do not take to any means of self-realization except devotional service and constant engagement in the 9 different processes of devotional service, especially hearing and chanting. When hearing and chanting about your transcendental pastimes, your devotees do not care even for the transcendental bliss derived from liberation or from merging into the existence of the Supreme Such. Devotees are not interested even in so-called liberation, and they are certainly have no interest in material activities for elevation to the heavenly planets for sense gratification. Pure devotees seek only the association of Paramahansas or great liberated devotees so that they can continuously hear and chant about your glories. For the purpose of pure devotees are prepared to sacrifice all comforts of life, even giving up the material comforts of family life and so-called society, friendship and love. Those who have tasted the nectar of devotional service by relishing the transcendental vibration of your chanting, your glories, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, do not care for any other spiritual bliss or for material comforts, which appear to the pure devotee as less important than the straw in the street.
The personified Vedas continued, Dear Lord, when a person is able to purify his mind, senses, and intelligence by engaging himself in devotional service in full Krishna consciousness, his mind becomes his friend. Otherwise, his mind is always his enemy. When the mind is engaged in the devotional service of the Lord, it becomes the intimate friend of the living entity, because the mind can then think of the Supreme Lord always. Your Lordship is eternally dear to the living entity. So when the mind is engaged in the thought of you, one immediately feels the great satisfaction for which he has been hankering life after life. When one's mind is thus fixed on the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one does not take to any kind of inferior worship or inferior process of self-realization. By attempting to worship a demigod or by taking to any other process of self-realization, the living entity becomes a victim of the cycle of birth and death, and no one can estimate how much the living entity is degraded by entering abominable species of life such as cats and dogs.
Shri Narottam Das Thakur has sung that persons who do not take to the devotional service of the Lord but are attracted to the process of philosophical speculation and fruitive activities drink the poisonous results of such actions. Such persons eat all kind of obnoxious things such as meat and take pleasure in alcohol and other intoxicants. And after death they are forced to take birth in lower species of life. Materialistic persons generally worship the transient material body and forget the welfare of the spirit soul within the body. Some take shelter of the materialistic science to improve bodily comforts, and some take to the worship of demigods to be promoted to the heavenly planets. Their goal in life is to make the material body comfortable, but they forget the interest of the spirit soul. Such persons are described in the Vedic literature as suicidal, because attachment for the material body and its comforts forces the living entity to wander through the process of birth and death perpetually and suffer the material pangs as a matter of course. The human form of life is a chance for one to understand his position. Therefore, the most intelligent person takes to devotional service just to engage his mind, senses, and body in the service of the Lord without deviation.
The personified Vedas continued, Dear Lord, there are many mystic yogis who are very learned and deliberate in achieving the highest perfection of life. They engage themselves in the yogic process of controlling the life air within the body, concentrating the mind upon the form of Vishnu, and controlling the senses very rigidly. They practice the yoga system. But even after much laborious austerity, penance, and regulation, all they achieve is the same destinations as persons inimical towards you. In other words, both the yogis and the great, wise philosophical speculators ultimately attain the impersonal Brahman effulgence, which is automatically attained by the demons who are regular enemies of the Lord. Demons like Kamsa, Sishupal, and Dantavakra attain the Brahman effulgence because they constantly meditate upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead out of enmity. The real point is to concentrate the mind on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Women, such as the gopis, were attached to Krishna, being captivated by his beauty, and their mental concentration on Krishna was provoked by lust. They wanted to be embraced by the arms of Krishna, which resemble the beautiful round shape of a snake. Similarly, we, the Vedic hymns, simply concentrate our minds on the lotus feet of your lordship. Women like the gopis concentrate upon you under the dictation of lust, and we concentrate upon your lotus feet to go back home, back to Godhead. Your enemies also concentrate upon you, thinking always of how to kill you, and yogis undertake great penances and austerities just to attain your impersonal effulgence. All these different persons, although concentrating their minds in different ways, achieve spiritual perfection according to their different perspectives, because you, O Lord, are equal to all your devotees.
Srila Swami has composed a nice verse in this regard. My dear Lord, to be engaged always in thinking of your lotus feet is very difficult. It is possible for great devotees who have already achieved love for you and are engaged in transcendental loving service. My dear Lord, I wish that my mind may also be fixed somehow or other on your lotus feet, at least for some time. The attainment of spiritual perfection by different spiritualists is explained in the Bhagavad Gita, wherein the Lord says that he grants the perfection the devotee desires in proportion to the devotee's surrender unto him. The impersonalists, yogis, and enemies of the Lord enter into the Lord's transcendental effulgence, but the personalists who follow in the footsteps of the inhabitants of Vrindavan will strictly follow the path of devotional service, are elevated to the personal abode of Krishna, Goloka Vrindavan, or to the Vaikuntha planets. Both the impersonalists and the personalists enter the spiritual realm, the spiritual sky, but the impersonalists are given their place in the impersonal Brahman effulgence, whereas the personalists are given a position in the Vaikuntha planets or in the Vrindavan planets, according to their desire to serve the Lord in different mellows.
The personified Vedas stated that persons born after the creation of this material world cannot understand the existence of the Supreme Person of Godhead by manipulating their material knowledge. Just as a person born in a particular family cannot understand the position of his great-grandfather, who lived before the birth of the recent generation, we are unable to understand the Supreme Person of Godhead, Narayan or Krishna, who exists eternally in the spiritual world. In the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, it is clearly said that the Supreme Person, who lives eternally in the spiritual kingdom of God, Sanatan Dhamma, can be approached only by devotional service. As for the material creation, Brahma is the first created person. Before Brahma, there was no living creature within this material world. It was void and dark until Brahma was born on the lotus flower that sprouted from the abdomen of Garbhodakshayi Vishnu. Garbhodakshayi Vishnu is an expansion of Karanadakshayi Vishnu. Karanadakshayi Vishnu is an expansion of Shankarsana. And Shankarsana is an expansion of Balaram, who is an immediate expansion of Lord Krishna. After the creation of Brahma, the two kinds of demigods were born. Demigods like the four brothers Sanaka, Sanatana, Sanandana, and Sanat Kumara, who are representatives of renunciation of the world. And demigods like Marichi and their descendants, who are meant to enjoy this material world. From these two kinds of demigods were gradually manifested all other living entities, including the human beings.
Thus, all living creatures within this material world, including Brahma, all the demigods, and all the Rakshasas, are to be considered modern. This means that they were all born recently. Therefore, just as a person born recently in a family cannot understand the situation of his distant forefather, no one within the material world can understand the position of the Supreme Lord in the spiritual world, because the material world has only recently been created. Although they have a long duration of existence, all the manifestations of the material world, namely the time element, the living entities, the Vedas, and gross and subtle material elements, are created at some point. Thus, any process manufactured within this created situation as a means for understanding the original source of creation is to be considered modern.
Therefore, by the process of self-realization or God-realization through fruitive activities, philosophical speculation or mystic yoga, one cannot actually approach the supreme source of everything. When the creation is completely terminated, when there is no existence of the Vedas, no existence of the material time, and no existence of the gross and subtle material elements, and when all the living entities are in the non-manifested stage, resting within Narayan, then all these manufactured processes become null and void and cannot act. Devotional service, however, is eternally going on in the eternal spiritual world. Therefore, the only factual process of self-realization or God-realization is devotional service. And one who takes to this process takes to the real process of God realization.
In this regard, Srila Swami has composed a verse which conveys the idea that the supreme source of everything, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is so great and unlimited that it is not possible for the living entity to understand Him by any material acquisition. One should therefore pray to the Lord to be engaged in His devotional service internal, so that by the grace of the Lord one can understand the supreme source of creation. The supreme source of creation, the Supreme Lord, reveals Himself only to the devotees. In the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Lord says to Arjuna, "My dear Arjuna, because you are my devotee and because you are my intimate friend, I shall reveal to you the process of understanding me. In other words, the supreme source of creation, the supreme personality of Godhead, cannot be understood by our own endeavors. We have to please Him with the devotional service, and then He will reveal Himself to us. Then we can understand Him to some extent.
There are different kinds of philosophers who have tried to understand the supreme source by their mental speculation. There are generally 6 kinds of mental speculators whose speculations are called Shad Darshan. All these philosophers are impersonalists and are known as Mayavadis. Every one of them has tried to establish his own opinion, although they all have later compromised and stated that all opinions lead to the same goal and that every opinion is therefore valid. According to the prayers of the personified Vedas, however, none of them is valid because their processes of knowledge is created within the temporary material world. They have all missed the real point, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or the absolute truth. That absolute truth can be understood only by devotional service.
One class of philosophers, known as Mimamsakas, represented by sages such as Jaimini, have concluded that everyone should engage in pious activities or prescribed duties, and that such activities will lead one to the highest perfection. But this is contradicted in the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where Lord Krishna says that by pious activities one may be elevated to the heavenly planets, but that as soon as one's accumulation of pious activities is used up, one has to leave the enjoyment of a higher standard of material prosperity in the heavenly planets and immediately come down again to these lower planets, where the duration of life is very short and where the standard of material happiness is of a lower grade. The exact words used in the Bhagavad Gita are Kshine Punye Martya Lokam Vishanti. Therefore, the conclusion of the Mimamsaka philosophers that pious activities will lead one to the absolute truth is not valid. Although a pure devotee is by nature inclined to perform pious activities, no one can attain the favor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead by pious activities alone. Pious activities may purify one of the contamination caused by ignorance and passion, but this purification is automatically attained by a devotee constantly engaged in hearing the transcendental message of Godhead in the form of the Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, or similar scriptures. From the Bhagavad Gita, we understand that even a person who is not up to the standard of pious activities, but who is absolutely engaged in devotional service, is to be considered well situated on the path of spiritual perfection. It is also said in the Bhagavad Gita that a person who is engaged in devotional service with love and faith is guided from within by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Lord Himself, as Paramatma, or the spiritual master sitting within one's heart, gives the devotee exact directions by which he can gradually go back to Godhead. The conclusion of the Mimamsaka philosophers is not actually the truth which can lead one to real understanding.
Similarly, there are Sankhya philosophers, metaphysicians, or materialistic scientists who study this cosmic manifestation by their invented scientific method and do not recognize the supreme authority of Godhead as the creator of cosmic manifestation. They wrongly conclude that the reactions of material elements are the original cause of creation. The Bhagavad Gita, however, does not accept this theory. It is clearly said therein that behind the cosmic activities is the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This fact is corroborated by the Vedic injunction Sattva Samyudam Agra Asit, which means that the origin of the creation existed before the cosmic manifestation. Therefore, the material elements cannot be caused the material creation. Although the material elements are accepted as immediate causes, the ultimate cause is the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself. The Bhagavad Gita says, therefore, the material nature works under the direction of Krishna.
The conclusion of the atheistic Sankhya philosophy is that because the effects, the phenomena of this material world are temporary or illusory, the cause is therefore also illusory. The Sankhya philosophers are in favor of voidism, but the actual fact is that the original cause is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and that this cosmic manifestation is the temporary manifestation of His material energy. When this temporary manifestation is annihilated, its cause, the eternal existence of the spiritual world, continues as it is, and therefore the spiritual world is called Sanatan Dham, the eternal abode. The conclusion of the Sankhya philosopher is therefore invalid.
Then there are the philosophers headed by Gautama and Kanada. They have minutely studied the cause and effect of the material elements and have ultimately come to the conclusion that atomic combination is the original cause of creation. At present, the materialistic scientists follow in the footsteps of Gautama and Kanada, who propounded this theory called Paramanuvada. This theory, however, cannot be supported, for the original cause of everything is not inert atoms. This is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, as well as in the Vedas, wherein it is stated, Eko Narayan Asit, only Narayan existed before the creation. Srimad Bhagavatam and the Vedanta Sutra also say that the original cause is sentient and both indirectly and directly cognizant of everything within this creation. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Aham Sarvasya Prabhava, I am the original cause of everything. And Mata Sarvan Pravartate, from me everything comes into existence. Therefore, atoms may form the basic combinations of material existence, but these atoms are generated from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Thus, the philosophy of Gautama and Kanada cannot be supported.
Similarly, impersonalists headed by Ashvavakra and later Sankaracharya accept the impersonal Brahman effulgence as the cause of everything. According to their theory, the material manifestation is temporary and unreal, whereas the impersonal Brahman effulgence is reality. But this theory cannot be supported either, because the Lord Himself says in the Bhagavad Gita that the Brahman effulgence rests on His personality. It is confirmed in the Brahma Samhita that the Brahman effulgence is the personal bodily rays of Krishna. As such, impersonal Brahman cannot be the original cause of the cosmic manifestation. The original cause is the all-perfect, sentient personality of Godhead, Govinda.
The most dangerous theory of the impersonalist is that when God comes as an incarnation, He accepts a material body created by the three modes of material nature. This Mayavad theory has been condemned by Lord Chaitanya as most offensive. He has said that anyone who accepts the transcendental body of the personality of Godhead to be made of material nature commits the greatest offense at the lotus feet of Vishnu. Similarly, the Bhagavad Gita also states that when the personality of Godhead descends in a human form, only fools and rascals deride him. This actually occurred when Lord Krishna, Lord Rama, and Lord Chaitanya moved within human society as human beings.
The personified Vedas condemn the impersonal conception as a gross misrepresentation. In the Brahma Samhita, the body of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is described as Ananda Chinmaya Ras. The Supreme Personality of Godhead possesses a spiritual body, not a material body. He can enjoy anything through any part of his body, and therefore he is omnipotent. The limbs of a material body can perform only a particular function. For example, the hands can hold but cannot see or hear. But because the body of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is made of Ananda Chinmaya Ras and is thus Satchidananda Vigraha, he can enjoy anything and do everything with any of his limbs. Acceptance of the spiritual body of the Lord as material is dictated by the tendency to equate the Supreme Personality of Godhead with the conditioned soul. The conditioned soul has a material body. Therefore, if God also has a material body, then the impersonalistic theory that the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entities are one and the same can be very easily propagated.
Factually, when the Supreme Personality of Godhead comes, he exhibits a non-material body, and thus there is no difference between his childish body when he is lying on the lap of Mother Yashoda and his so-called grown-up body fighting with the demons. In his childhood body, he also fought with demons, such as Putana, Trinavrat and Aghasura, with strength equal to that with which he fought in his youth against demons like Dantavakra and Shishupal. In material life, as soon as a conditioned soul changes his body, he forgets everything of his past body. But from the Bhagavad Gita, we understand that because Krishna has a Satchidananda body, he did not forget instructing the Sun God about the Bhagavad Gita millions of years ago. The Lord is therefore known as Purushottama because he is transcendental to both material and spiritual existence. That he is the cause of all causes means that he is the cause of the spiritual world and of the material world as well. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is omnipotent and omniscient. Therefore, because a material body can be neither omnipotent nor omniscient, the Lord's body is surely not material. The Mayavadi theory that the Personality of Godhead comes within this material world with a material body cannot be supported by any means.
It can be concluded that all the theories of the materialist philosopher are generated from temporary illusion, except like the conclusion in the dream. Such conclusion certainly cannot lead us to the absolute truth. The absolute truth can be realized only through the devotional service. As the Lord says in Bhagavad Gita, Bhaktya ma abhijita, only by devotional service can one understand me. Srila Siddha Swami has composed a nice verse in this regard, which states, My dear Lord, let others engage in a false argument and dry speculation theories upon great philosophical these. Let them lotterate in the darkness of ignorance and illusion, falsely enjoying as if very learned scholars, although they are without knowledge of the Supreme Personality of God. As far as I am concerned, I wish to be liberated simply by chanting the holy name of all beautiful Supreme Personality of Godhead, Madhava, Vamana, Tripura, Sankarsana, Sripata, and Govinda, simply by chanting your transcendental names, O Lord Madhupati, let me become free from all continuation of this material excess.
In this way, the personified Vedas said, Dear Lord, when a living entity, by your grace only, comes to the right conclusion about your exalted transcendental position, he no longer bothers with the different theories manufactured by the mental speculators or so-called philosophers. This is a reference to the speculative theories of Gautama, Kanad, Patanjali, and Kapila, Niriswara. There is actually two Kapilas. One Kapila, the son of Kardama Muni, is an incarnation of God, and the other is an atheist of the modern age. The atheistic Kapila is often misrepresented to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Lord Kapila, the incarnation of Godhead, appeared as the son of Kardama Muni long ago during the time of Swayambhuva Manu. The modern age is the age of Vaivasvata Manu.
According to Mayavad philosophy, this manifested world or material world is mithya or maya, false. The Mayavadi preaching principle is Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya. Only the Brahman effulgence is true and the cosmic manifestation is illusory or false. But according to Vaishnava philosophy, this cosmic manifestation is true because it is caused by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that He enters within this material world by one of His plenary portions, and thus the creation takes place. From the Vedas also, we can understand that this Asat or temporary cosmic manifestation is an emanation from the Supreme Sat or fact. From the Vedanta Sutra also, it is understood that everything has emanated from the Supreme Brahman. Therefore, the Vaishnavas do not take this cosmic manifestation to be false. Because the Supreme Personality of Godhead has entered this cosmic manifestation in the form of His plenary expansion and caused the creation, the Vaishnava philosophers see everything in this material world in relationship with the Supreme Lord.
This conception of the material world is very nicely explained by Srila Rupa Goswami, who says that when persons renounce the material world as illusory or false without knowing the material world is a manifestation of the Supreme Lord. Their renunciation is of no value. The Vaishnavas, however, are free from attachment to this world because although the material world is generally accepted as an object of sense gratification, the Vaishnavas are not in favor of sense gratification and are therefore not attached to material activities. The Vaishnavas accept this material world according to the regulatory principles of the Vedic injunctions and works without attachment. Since the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the original cause of everything, the Vaishnava sees everything in relationship with the Krsna. Even in this material world, by such advanced knowledge, everything becomes spiritualized. In other words, everything in the material world is already spiritual, but due to our lack of knowledge, we see things as material.
The personified Vedas presented the example that those seeking gold do not reject gold earrings, gold bangles, or anything else made of gold simply because they are shaped differently from the original gold. All living entities are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord and are qualitatively one with Him, but they are now differently shaped in 84 lakh species of life, just like many different ornaments manufactured from the same source of gold. As one who is interested in gold accepts all the differently shaped gold ornaments, so a Vaishnava, knowing well that all living entities are of the same quality as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, accepts all living entities as eternal servants of God. A Vaishnava, then, has ample opportunity to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead simply by reclaiming these conditioned, misled living entities, training them in Krishna consciousness and leading them back home, back to Godhead. The fact is that the minds of the living entities are now agitated by the three material qualities, and the living entities are therefore transmigrating as if in dreams from one body to another. When their consciousness is changed into Krishna consciousness, however, they immediately fix Krishna within their hearts, and thus their path towards liberation becomes clear.
In all the Vedas, the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entities are stated to be of the same quality, Chaitana, or spiritual. This is confirmed in the Padma Purana, wherein it is said that there are two kinds of spiritual entities. One is called the Jiva, and the other is called the Supreme Lord. From Lord Brahma down to the ant, all living entities are Jivas, whereas the Lord is the Supreme Four-Handed Vishnu, or Janardana. Strictly speaking, the word Atma can be applied only to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But because the living entities are his parts and parcels, sometimes the word Atma is applied to them also. The living entities are therefore called Jiva Atma, and the Supreme Lord is called Paramatma. Both the Paramatma and the Jiva Atma are within this material world, and therefore this material world has a purpose other than sense gratification. The conception of a life of sense gratification is illusion. But the conception of service by the Jiva Atma to the Paramatma, even in this material world, is not at all illusory. A Krishna-conscious person is fully aware of this fact, and thus he does not take this material world to be false, but acts in the reality of transcendental service. The devotee therefore sees everything in this material world as an opportunity to serve the Lord. He does not reject anything as material, but dovetails everything in the service of the Lord. Thus, a devotee is always in the transcendental position, and everything he uses becomes spiritually purified by being used in the Lord's service.
I think we finished.
Srila Swami has composed a nice verse in this regard. I worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is always manifested as reality, even within this material world, which is considered by some to be false. The conception of the falsity of this material world is due to a lack of knowledge. But a person advanced in Krishna consciousness sees the Supreme Personality of Godhead in everything. This is actual realization of the Vedic aphorism, Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma, everything is Brahman.
So that concludes our 1 hour of reading Krishna book to Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada, thank you very much for allowing us to come and read to you. So let us offer our respectful obeisances to Srila Prabhupada and to each other. Namo Vishnuvadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Nirvasesha Sunyavadi Paskacha Deshatarane. And to each other, Vanchakalpatrubhischa Kripa Sindhu Vyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So for all of you online and everyone here, we'll continue with the prayers by the personified Vedas next Sunday. And as we all know, tomorrow is the sacred event of Gaura Purnima. So tune in. Haribo, Gauranga, Gauranga. So you can tune in if you're online. You can tune in to ISKCON Vrindavan Facebook page or YouTube, and you can see the entire celebration here at ISKCON Vrindavan. And then on Tuesday night, for those of you online, we have a wonderful, wonderful cultural program, and so you can participate online if you like. Thank you. Hare Krishna.